Today I want to talk about the Rachel Madow effect, i.e. the gossip queen. The reason why I want to talk about Rachel Madow as it relates to YouTube or social media is the what works in media. I'm not saying that Rachel Madow is some great news lady or something. However, it's a stick that I saw her doing in the early 2000s or late 90s whenever she was getting going, along with John Stewart and friends, where essentially they would mock the news or mock people in the news, specifically politicians, and it's this very sarcastic, over-the-top kind of commentary about the news. I think at some point in the late 90s, early 2000s, as a result of A/B testing, where the news networks were constantly looking for new personalities to get ratings. They were specifically optimizing for ratings. And they're looking at which commentator, which personality would increase ratings. At the time, they were trying a lot of different formats. I mean, they would do Crossfire with Tucker Carlson and, some opposing view and then let them fight it out. And that didn't necessarily work out. They were also looking at and again, they're trying to optimize for ads. They need ratings. They needed people to pay attention to what they were saying. And while the Crossfire thing didn't really work, because yes, it was a train wreck and people would tune in initially for the fight, it would have the Jerry Springer effect where it would die over time. And again, Jerry Springer was the king of train wrecks and everyone would watch the train wreck. But for more serious news, people were like, no, seriously, we need to be informed. There's a war going on. My brother or my son or my cousin or me is in said war, and people are coming back in body bags, and we need to know what it is that we're fighting about and why. On the other hand, while the news networks knew that they needed to deliver the news, they still were ad supported. So there was different initiatives like PBS in the States, which was taxpayer subsidized news. NPR was another one. The BBC in, say, Europe or wherever, or BTV in New York. I don't know. There was a lot of public access news outlets that were subsidized by the taxpayer to create quality programming so that we could be informed, because there's a lot of crazy things going on in the world that the voters need to vote on. Jefferson had a quote something like, in order to have a functioning democracy, you need a well-informed public. Unfortunately, because the news network is ad-supported, their interest is not necessarily informing the public. Their interest is optimizing for ads and ratings. And so there's a public backlash with these public broadcasting initiatives saying, hey, you're not giving us the real news, cut the Jerry Springer shit, and come on, we need real news. And if you want to call yourself the news, then you're going to have to start delivering the news. So a lot of new initiatives would form. They would start A/B testing different personalities, trying to make the news more watchable, something that people could actually watch or would tune into. So you get a lot of A/B testing. They tried a lot of things. One of them was they noticed the John Stewart effect, where essentially snarky comedy, sarcastic comedy, ironic comedy, where people say one thing and then they show a clip of them doing just the opposite or doing another, was would work really well for, say, Comedy Central. College kids would tune in to see what John Stewart had to say. But as the mainstream media, you're going how do we get people to listen to Wolf Blitzer? He's really, really boring. But he's good at delivering a script. Maybe he wrote it, maybe I don't think he does. But he'll read it in such a way where people think that, hey, here's a newscaster who is reading me the news. And, okay, I guess that works. Anderson Cooper started out, I think, I don't think he started as a war correspondent, but he did a lot of war corresponding because during the war, people were tuning in to see what was going on in the war. Apparently, the Iraq invasion was the most publicized war in history. I mean, in Vietnam, they were suppressing the news on Vietnam because the war wasn't going very well, and a lot of young men were getting murdered in the execution of that war. And even World War I and II, there was a lot of propaganda. There was a lot of trying to get people to buy bonds so that they could fund the war, and a lot of people were very upset about this, so they felt like, well, we have to control the news in order to control the population so that we don't have a riot at home while we're trying to execute on the war. In Vietnam, they lost control of that, and the people rebelled, and this ultimately led to Nixon resigning over Watergate. There's a lot of things there, but eventually the U.S. was kind of forced to disengage with the Vietnamese over upset people at home. There's a lot more to say about Vietnam, and I'm not the person to say it at this time, so we'll leave that one alone. But the conflict continues, and then during the Reagan era, they were still fighting communists. It never went away. They were still fighting the Russians, the Cold War. They still had the embargo against Cuba, and the Russians were still supporting the Russians, but the U.S. was still supporting, all our allies as well. And so there's this tug of war going on, and controlling the media was vital to building public support for or against a war. And then that would ultimately change the direction of events. For instance, the public didn't want to have a full-scale war after Vietnam, and they vote very specifically against these sort of things. And the Reagan administration went ahead and funded an illegal war with Oliver North and friends. The whole Iran-Contra controversy, or the hearings, the congressional hearings, where they even put Reagan onto the stand. They put Oliver North on the stand, and they're like, what did you guys actually do here? Because it seems like you were arming rebels to fight communists and using cocaine that you sold to American youth and globally to fund it, to fund an illegal war with the drug trade. Is that what you did? And obviously the news can't report on all the dirty details of what was going on before the congressional hearings. It was only because they got caught, because there was a cocaine epidemic here at home where, tons of people were being sent to prison while the government was funding the war with us. So it was definitely them speaking out of both sides of their mouth, where they're basically saying like, okay, I know we're going to get tough on drugs and we're going to lock people up and whatever, but hey, there's still these communists and we still have to respond, and the hunt for WMD is unrelenting. This requires hypervigilance, hence the industrial military complex. This is not going away, and if you're not going to let me do what I got to do, we'll find other ways to do it. And so then the CIA and friends start doing their job, start conducting clandestine missions, and do it in secret. And then every time the news pipes up on it too much, they'll either accuse them of being a leaker, or that they're somehow un-American, or you're exposing spies, and you know what? That's the media's job. So at some point, I think the government has always known that they have to control the media if they want to stay in power, or if they want to conduct the hunt for WMDs. So they, in addition to funding things like PBS and stuff, they were also funding or limiting what the news outlets could or could not say. And a lot of them, this is where like all the deep state stuff kind of comes into play, where like maybe the CIA was telling CNN they're not allowed to report on these things, and that they should promote said war, and here's some money, thank you very much. That's all conspiracy theory, and some of it might be true, some of it might not. But anyways, during the A/B testing, they're like, well, how do we still draw attention to the things that we want and not piss off all our advertisers or our viewing base? I mean, this is a hard thing to do if you think about it. Like, how can you talk about politics without becoming political yourself. So one thing that they found was that humor obviously helps. Pointing out contradictions, John Stewart style, helps. But if you're the newscaster, how do you walk that line? And the answer is you don't, right? In fact, we see that the network will take a position on stuff, and then they will, like CNN is obviously pro-Democrat, Fox News is obviously pro-Republican, and a lot of the media is definitely liberal, and they're all kind of walking the same line. But for like a Rachel Madow or a Keith Olbermann, they too needed the ratings if they wanted to survive as a news commentator in a hyper liberal thing. So they can't make fun of liberals as much. So what they do is that they'll just have overly sarcastic commentary, which sounds like comedy, like they're faming comedy, or they sound like they're comedians, but they're not really comedians, and they're not really delivering jokes. They're just making fun of the other side. They're demonizing the opposition. And the other weird thing about demonizing the opposition is eventually you need something to charge them with. You need something to make fun of them with. And this is no longer news. This is like high school bullying. This is gossip. And what do? Like, again, it doesn't have to be true accusations. It could just be, false allegations, or I just don't like this person. He's such an asshole. Or he's such he's so gross, yuck. And ultimately, this doesn't really mean that you stand for anything. Like, it sounds like you took a political position. It sounds like comedy because of the sarcasm. It sounds like actually bullying and gossip. But you're really just saying, I'm not for something. This turns into anti-Trump or never Trumpers, or anti-Fox or never Fox, or Fox is fake news. But we're real news. Come on, guys. We're on your side here. Let us go demonize the opposition. Let's make fun of them. I don't care if it's hypocritical. I don't care if it's mean. I'm going to go after these guys. And then, these were the main proponents of stuff like Russia, Russia, Russia. They were like Keith Olbermann and Rachel Madow were probably the two biggest proponents of this. Like, they were the ones saying this the most that I saw anyways. And they're like, Russia, 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 Russia. Anything that sounded like it could have been Russian and that they can slime Trump with it, they would do. And they made the hour-long hour-long broadcast about this very subject. And even I think, were going getting a little sick of the Russia, Russia, Russia narrative. But that was their job. Their job was to slime Trump with the Russia narrative. Why? Because they have no journalistic integrity. Why? Because they have a fan base that wants to hear how Trump is guilty of something. And so they would be more than happy to tune in and say, see, CNN said so. It must be true. And because they spent so much political capital on Russia, 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 and all these sort of things, they kind of lost their own credibility, even with their own base. I think a lot of people realize that this is no longer credible, and people are just picking sides, and they're like, well, whatever. I don't care if it's true or not. I'm on the left side, therefore, I'm going to support X, Y, and Z, and whatever. Yeah. So CNN, being hyper vigilant about their branding and their image and how they're being perceived, started looking at their news reporters and going yeah, they are being way overly opinionated, and this is just sarcasm, and it doesn't sound like news anymore. And so what could we do to make it sound more like news? Oh, I know. Walter Cronkite. We need to look more like Walter Cronkite or some other news journalist person. So then they very specifically started having them wear glasses. Like even Anderson Cooper had to wear the 1950s Ray-Ban style looking, thick black glasses, just so that they appear to be more newsworthy. And so they were working on their optics, but they didn't rein in their message at all. And the reason why was because they needed that sarcasm to keep the ratings up. I'm not so sure that actually worked out in their favor because they lost credibility at doing this. But at the same time, they're like doing everything but change the sarcasm in order to appear to be more newsworthy or have more integrity in their reporting. And so the reason why I bring all this up is because when they were first, A/B testing a Rachel Madow, she was like a young, good-looking lady, right? I don't know if she was good-looking, but she was definitely, her audience was responding to her. Her numbers tested well, right? Her A/B test showed that with test audience, she did okay. Keith Olbermann was like the male version with the over-the-top sarcasm, and even though he's getting older, significantly older, he doesn't have the same optics problem that a Madow might have had, meaning that, it's okay for guys to get super old. If anything, it makes them seem more wiser than they are. And maybe they're more like but this doesn't work for women. As women get older, it hit the proverbial wall, right? They can't rely on their looks as much as they used to. In fact, they have to rely on their brain more. And a lot of them, so they might have started out as a pretty young lady that looked great on TV, but as they hit the wall, they have to, either become more humorous, funnier, or they might have to have better journalism. So they have to have a higher standard for journalism than, say, a Keith Olbermann who could just be sarcastic all day long. And nobody seemed to care. They're like, whatever. But Rachel, she went over the top on the sarcasm, and because it sounds like comedy, I think she thinks she's being funny, or that the audience thinks she's being funny or ironic somehow, or telling them the straight truth. And I personally can't stand her. It's just like, okay, I can only take the sarcasm so much. This is turning into Jerry Springer nonsense. Like, what are you doing? Like, can you cut the crap? But because it's gossip, and it's very gossipy, it's very bullying, where she's definitely she's definitely slandering and libeling herself all day long when she does this anti-Trump rhetoric or the Russia thing. So this always causes me to wonder why would people respond to this? Why are people okay with the slander and the libel and the hyper sarcasm? Like, what is that? Like, why are people down with this other than picking sides? So a couple people pointed out on Facebook or YouTube or wherever on your social media, different firebrand personalities that are coming up. The Blaze with Glenn Beck, he spawned a couple of these where, he left after leaving Fox and CNN, his $2 million a year kind of salary. He ended up doing like The Blaze, and I think he raised $100 million. I don't know. I've heard figures that high. And I think he too got tired of having to do all the gossip and, try and do all the sarcasm and really play to the crowd. I think he was like, I can't produce 24 hours worth of content all day, so I too need co-hosts and I need to build some personalities. And some of the things that worked on Fox, or at least Fox and Friends, was the couch, where they would have pretty ladies like, say, a Megyn Kelly, and they would wear, dresses so that they could show skin, i.e. their legs, on TV in these brightly colored sets. So then in the background, it looks like maybe more like a painting where there's pretty colors, pretty ladies. Hopefully they're saying something that you agree with so that you're not pissed off while you're trying to cook dinner. And it makes for a more pleasant conversation. But then really what you're doing is you're using people like props. You're not really doing news anymore, which is fine, I guess. It works. For instance, I think Tommy Lauren was one of them. I'm not sure how you say her name. She spells it funny, Tomi, instead of Tommy, but whatever. She was one of them. She was like a Goldilocks, 24-year-old, 23-year-old, pretty lady, but she was a firebrand. So she'd get up there and she would just, I wouldn't call it sarcasm. She would just go off. She'd be like, you know what I think? Let me tell you what I really think about stuff, right? And then just really get into it. And the more emotion she put into her rhetoric, the more responses she got. Dana was another one. She's a firebrand where she would get up there and go like, I have 3 sons, and as a woman, I think this. Let me tell you all about it. And you would go, oh. Well, I guess I'm supposed to listen now. What? Why are you mad, pretty lady? And this allowed Beck to do other things. Like, he didn't have to get up there and be hyper sarcastic or hyper ironic. Or in Beck's case, he tends to really play up his rhetoric. It sounds more like he's auditioning for a play in Shakespeare. He's like, he'll even get into character and start doing voices, and he's like, the Rothschilds, and try to really play into it. So I think he enjoys the entertainment aspect of the news reporting, but that's also what worked for him. Where his sets were always nice. I thought he was really good at putting together a good set. I think that his writing's okay, or I don't know, I guess he's pretty good. And he's very entertaining to listen to. I would sit there and listen to him, and I would go like, Beck, I know what you're saying half the time is making me upset, but I like being upset to a degree. Go ahead, lie to me, Beck. I like it. I think he definitely changed his tune when he left CNN and Fox and did The Blaze, and I think he did a lot of soul searching and has been trying to change his tune and try to be more of a peacemaker than just a hyper vigilant, one-sided kind of news broadcaster. And because of it, he keeps talking about his principles, or what the principles of The Blaze should be, or what conservatism is really about. Like, I think he's really diving into what it really means, right? And they're going to try to hold a specific narrative or a specific line that's in tune with whatever Beck is feeling at the time. And like, I think there was like the whole Tommy controversy where she was on The View, or I don't know which show it was, but she was on a show. She was talking to the co-host, and then the whole abortion issue came up, where I think the Blaze was saying that they were pro-life, and Tommy at some point in the interview said that she was pro-choice, meaning that she was for the woman's right to choose. And that was like a libertarian kind of stance, where it's like, oh, she should be able to choose things, and it's her choice, it's her body, it's her life, that kind of stuff. And that was directly opposite of what the Blaze was saying, where they were pro-life, they're against abortion. She's headlining the Blaze. The conservative audience had an uproar over it, and I guess backfired her over this. And there was some controversy over it because she took the wrong position, wrong think, on a major broadcast. So, and she didn't back down or apologize. I don't know if she did or didn't, but in the aftermath, Fox and Friends kind of said, you know what, that's a pretty good firebrand right there. Like, she would look great on our set, and she fits in right with the whole conservative thing. And maybe they're not hyper conservatives like what the Blaze was, and we're not terribly worried about our principles so much. I mean, we are, but we're not. She looks like a rising star. Let's put her on Fox and Friends and see what happens. And I think she's a regular commentator now. On YouTube, you see a lot of this where people seem to be picking up on the sarcasm, where they're like, so you mean to say if I'm a pretty lady and I'm on YouTube and I take a political side and then get very sarcastic on it, and with nothing more than my phone, I could build a 10,000 person following, or I could build a 20,000 person following, and I'll let my audience be my guide. So it's a little opposite of Pinocchio. Let your conscience be your guide. It's like, no. I'll let my followers be my guide. And a lot of people will end up following the same sort of A/B testing principle, or not principle, but like where your numbers and your audience will kind of dictate which direction you go. And it's kind of a hook, right? So these young 20-somethings are now on YouTube doing the Rachel Madow thing, being super sarcastic, not necessarily trying to be funny, but maybe like clown leftists or rightists or Fox or whoever, and see how many views they get off of it. The problem will be, like, as they get older, they're going to realize that maybe people were only paying attention to them because they were a pretty lady. So then their snarkiness might go up. Their rhetoric might get a little bitchy. And it's kind of a trap, right? Where you're going like, okay, well, this is just gossip. And who's going to listen to this gossip and they're not necessarily interested in the YouTuber as a prop anymore? It's going to be a bunch of burn victims, meaning like, a bunch of divorcees or a bunch of people that felt like they got slighted in life. And I think CNN is proving this out, where there's a lot of people watching this. They're either retired or stay-at-home moms or divorced people, and they see this and you're like, you know what? I just want to be mad. Let's get mad together. Misery loves company. And this is clearly not news. This is hyper sarcasm. This is hyper ridicule. This is straight up gossip. And and Rachel Madow is the gossip queen. She's one of them anyways. The other queen is Keith Olbermann, but that's a different joke. Ha 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 ha.
Here are a couple things America got right. Cars and freedom.